Old Hollywood didn't just have drinking problems. It had victims. Behind the tuxedos, red carpets, and studio smiles were drunk stars who crashed cars, pulled weapons, terrified partners, attacked strangers, and left families cleaning up the wreckage. Some lost careers. Some lost marriages. Some lost their lives. These are 11 dangerous, old Hollywood drunks and the damage they left behind. George Campbell Scott was not some quiet drinker who got sleepy in the corner. When alcohol took over, things could turn ugly fast. Scott himself called his heavy drinking an addiction, and by 1971, Time was already writing about his broken noses from barroom fights. He had that hard, intimidating screen presence, and according to Scott, some men saw that as an invitation. There was always somebody in a bar who wanted to prove he could take down the tough guy from the movies. Usually, that was a very bad life choice. But the worst stories were not from random guys in bars. They came from Ava Gardner. She worked with Scott on John Huston's The Bible in 1964, and their relationship reportedly became frightening when he drank. Gardner later said that when Scott got drunk, he broke into her hotel rooms in Italy, London, and the Beverly Hills Hotel. In one fight, she said he smashed bottles and threatened her with the broken glass. She also claimed he attacked her while demanding that she marry him. That is where the story stops being Hollywood gossip and becomes something much darker. This was not just a wild actor having a rough night. This was alcohol turning anger into danger, and it did not stay behind closed doors. Scott's drinking followed him to work too. During one production, he smashed a dressing room. At another point, he had to be placed under medical care to dry out. George Campbell Scott had talent, fame, awards, and a voice that could scare a room into silence. But alcohol still dragged him into fights, damaged relationships, and made people around him feel unsafe. That is the real warning here. Heavy drinking does not just hurt the person holding the glass. It can hurt partners, families, co-workers, and anyone unlucky enough to be nearby. Jack Pickford had the kind of last name Hollywood treated like a golden passport. As Mary Pickford's younger brother, he lived close to silent-era royalty, but his own reputation was built on drinking, drugs, gambling, affairs, and scandals that seemed to follow him from one party to the next. If early Hollywood had a do not leave unattended list, Jack probably had his own private section. The darkest chapter came in Paris in 1920. Jack and his wife, Olive Thomas, had been out drinking before returning to the Hotel Ritz around 3 in the morning. What happened next became one of early Hollywood's most disturbing tragedies. Olive swallowed mercury bichloride, a poisonous medication prescribed to Jack and meant only for external use. French police investigated the death and ruled it accidental, but the story followed Jack for the rest of his life like a ghost in evening clothes. And the chaos did not stop there. His later marriages were also described as ugly and unstable, with alcohol and drugs sitting right in the middle of the damage. Jack had charm, money, access, and one of the most powerful surnames in Hollywood. But none of that could make him stable. He was the kind of man who looked like he had been born into privilege, then spent every year proving privilege was not the same thing as control. By 1933, the party was over. Jack Pickford died in Paris at only 36 from illness linked to alcoholism. 36. That is not a long Hollywood life. That is a warning label with a tuxedo on it. Jack Pickford had fame close enough to touch, but alcohol, drugs, and reckless living turned his story into another silent-era disaster nobody could laugh off. Robert Walker looked like the clean-cut movie star Hollywood could safely put in front of American families. Then his real life started falling apart faster than a cheap studio set in a rainstorm. His drinking became public after Jennifer Jones left him for producer David O. Selznick, and the heartbreak hit him hard. Soon after the separation, Walker was arrested for drunk driving. He had been drinking in a bar, hit a truck with his Chrysler, and then drove away. That is not a bad night. That is a headline with handcuffs. The arrest made the newspapers, and the jail photo damaged the innocent image he had built in Since You Went Away and The Clock. Hollywood loved a handsome, sad man on screen. It was much less charming when the sadness came with a police report. His second marriage did not survive either. In 1948, Walker married Barbara Ford, the daughter of director John Ford. The marriage lasted only months. Barbara left because Walker reportedly became violent when he drank too much. And this is where the story needs honesty. If you had faced his heartbreak, pressure, humiliation, and emotional collapse, you might understand why he reached for a bottle. But that does not mean alcohol was the answer. Pain can explain the drinking. It does not excuse the damage. Walker later spent time at the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas. Somehow, he returned to work and gave the performance people still remember. Bruno Anthony and Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. Creepy, charming, unstable, almost too perfect, considering what was happening behind the scenes. On August 28, 1951, Walker's housekeeper found him in an emotional state. His psychiatrist, Frederick Hacker, came to the house and gave him a Moberbeetle. Walker had allegedly been drinking. That same night, he died at only 32. Robert Walker's story is a brutal reminder. Alcohol does not heal heartbreak. It can take a wounded man and make the wound everybody's problem. Mayo Methot entered Hollywood as a Warner Brothers actress, but history remembers her mostly for the marriage that sounded less like romance and more like a police dispatch with better lighting. In 1938, she married Humphrey Bogart, and together they became one of the loudest, wildest, most alcohol-soaked couples in old Hollywood. The press called them the Battling Bogarts, which sounds cute until you realize their home was nicknamed Sluggy Hollow. That is not a honeymoon house. That is a boxing gym with curtains. Both of them drank heavily, and when the liquor started talking, the neighbors reportedly heard breaking glass, shouted curses, and even occasional gunfire. Methot threw plants, dishes, and whatever else was close enough to become airborne. In one fight, she stabbed Bogart in the shoulder with a knife. In another, they reportedly hit each other over the head with whiskey bottles. At that point, the bottle was no longer a drink. It was furniture, weaponry, and marriage counseling, all in one. Actress Gloria Stewart remembered a dinner party where Methot drunkenly pulled out a pistol and threatened to shoot Bogart. Stewart also said she saw bruises on Methot's face and witnessed physical fights between the couple. This was the dark side of Hollywood glamour: tuxedos, cocktails, movie stars, and a living room that sounded like the last 10 minutes of a gangster film. After one wartime night of heavy drinking in Italy, Methot insisted on singing for John Huston and Bogart. That messy performance later helped inspire the drunken nightclub scene in Key Largo, but in real life, there was no clean fade out. Bogart left the marriage in 1944. Methot died in Portland in 1951 at 47, with her death later linked to acute alcoholism. Mayo Methot's story is a brutal warning. When alcohol becomes the third person in a relationship, it does not calm anything down. It breaks the glass, raises the volume, turns love into a fight scene, and in the heaviest cases, it takes the final payment, a person's own life. For Methot, alcohol did not just damage her marriage, it followed her all the way to the end. Lawrence Tierney looked like he was built for trouble. In 1945, he became famous playing John Dillinger, and Hollywood suddenly had a tough guy who looked like he could scare a room without raising his voice. The problem was, off-screen, Tierney's violence did not stay in the movies. Between 1944 and 1951, he was arrested at least 12 times in Los Angeles for drunkenness and fighting. One night, he ripped a public telephone off a bar wall. Another time, after a waiter refused to serve him more drinks, Tierney hit him in the face with a sugar bowl. That is not a night out. That is a police report with table service. The pattern kept repeating. Bars, booze, fists, arrests. He tried to choke a taxi driver. He served 3 months for brawling in 1947. In 1951, he got 90 days after breaking a college student's jaw in a bar fight. In 1952, he served 66 days in Chicago for drunk and disorderly conduct. By 1958, he was arrested outside a Manhattan bar for resisting arrest and assaulting 2 officers. Tierney had the face, the voice, and the menace to become one of Hollywood's great screen villains. But alcohol kept turning opportunity into disaster. He later admitted, "I threw away about 7 careers through drink." That line says everything. Talent opened the door. Alcohol slammed it shut. If alcohol was behind every arrest, every fight, and every ruined chance, Would this story make you walk away from the bottle for good? Robert Mitchum did not drink like a nervous actor trying to relax after work. He drank scotch from a water glass, no ice, and reportedly sipped it all day like coffee. Sidney Pollack noticed the habit while directing him in The Yakuza. Most stars had a morning routine. Mitchum apparently had breakfast, attitude, and a glass of trouble. He also had the reputation to match it. Mitchum was known as a hard-drinking hellraiser, the kind of guy who could turn a quiet bar into a boxing undercard before closing time. One barroom brawl reportedly ended with heavyweight boxer Bernie Reynolds in the hospital. That is not casual drinking. That is ordering scotch with a side of legal problems. The clearest career disaster came during Blood Alley in 1955. Mitchum had been hired to star opposite Lauren Bacall, but before filming even began, he was removed from the movie. Later accounts claimed he had been drinking, raising hell, and even threw the film's transportation manager into San Francisco Bay. Mitchum denied the story, but the damage was done. John Wayne stepped in and took the role himself. In Hollywood, when John Wayne has to replace you because you may have turned the production into a dockside circus, something has gone very wrong. Then came the David O. Selznick story. Mitchum said he drank at least 8 double scotches before going to Selznick's penthouse to discuss A Doll's House. During the meeting, he relieved himself on Selznick's carpet. Shockingly, he did not get the part. Robert Mitchum had talent, coolness, and one of the most unforgettable screen presences in Hollywood. But alcohol kept turning his legend into chaos. When drinking costs you roles, respect, and chances people would kill for, it is no longer part of the image. It is the thing eating the image alive. Broderick Crawford had the kind of gravelly voice that made every sentence sound like a police warning. In 1950, he won the Oscar for All the King's Men, proving he was not just another tough face in Hollywood. 5 years later, he became Chief Dan Matthews in Highway Patrol, a hit police drama about reckless drivers, road patrols, and lawmen keeping the streets under control. Off-screen, Crawford had his own driving problem. In November 1952, he spent several hours in jail after a drunk driving arrest in Los Angeles. And during the very years he was playing a highway officer on television, his drinking reportedly brought more DUI stops and arrests. The irony was almost too perfect. America was watching him chase dangerous drivers on TV, while, in real life, he was becoming one of the drivers officers had to stop. Eventually, Crawford's license was suspended. Some driving scenes were reportedly staged so he would not actually be driving on public roads. Imagine starring in a show called Highway Patrol and being the one person the Highway Patrol did not want behind the wheel. That is not behind-the-scenes trivia. That is Hollywood comedy with a police report attached. The California Highway Patrol reportedly gave him the nickname Old 502 because 502 was the radio code for drunk driving. Brutal nickname, but honestly, hard to argue with. Broderick Crawford had an Oscar, fame, and a TV role built on authority. But alcohol turned that image inside out. When drinking makes the man playing the law look like the problem the law is chasing, the message is pretty clear. The bottle does not care about your reputation. It can make even a Hollywood chief look guilty at the wheel. William Holden's drinking did not usually explode in nightclubs or turn into loud bar fights. His was quieter, darker, and much more dangerous. It showed up in cars, hotel rooms, and empty apartments, the kind of places where nobody laughs when things go wrong. The worst public case came on July 26, 1966, near Pisa, Italy. Holden was driving a Ferrari when it collided with another car. The other driver, Valerio Giorgio Novelli, died after the crash. Italian authorities charged Holden with manslaughter. Alcohol was part of the investigation, and the case ended with an 8-month suspended prison sentence. Holden later paid damages to Novelli's family. That is the part people should not brush past. This was not just a movie star having one too many. A man lost his life. A family lost someone forever, and Holden had to live with that shadow for the rest of his days. But the drinking did not leave him. Friends later described him as a heavy alcoholic, and the damage became visible on screen. The handsome golden boy of Hollywood began to look tired, worn down, like the bottle was slowly stealing the man behind the movie star. His final incident came in November 1981. Holden was alone in his Santa Monica apartment, reportedly intoxicated, when he fell and hit his head on a bedside table. His body was found several days later. William Holden's story is a brutal reminder that alcohol does not always destroy a life with noise. Sometimes it does it quietly, one drink, one drive, one fall, one empty room at a time. W.C. Fields made America laugh with a voice that sounded like it had been soaked in gin, dried in cigar smoke, and sent back on stage with complaints about children. He was one of the greatest comic performers of his era. Vaudeville, juggling, radio, movies, the whole package. But the character people loved on screen started getting dangerously close to the man behind it. Fields built a legendary image as the cranky old drinker who hated kids and loved the bottle. Funny on camera, much less funny when real life began copying the act. By the mid-1930s, alcohol was no longer part of the joke. It was attacking his body, his work, and his control. At one point, he was reportedly drinking more than 2 quarts of gin a day. That is not a habit. That is a medical emergency wearing a comedy hat. His alcoholism led to delirium tremens and serious health problems. He struggled through Poppy in 1936 and the big broadcast of 1938. But Paramount eventually let him go. The studio did not need a drunk character. It already had a real man falling apart. The cruel twist is that the public loved Fields as a lovable drunk. He became famous for the very image that was helping destroy him. As his health collapsed, he gained weight, showed signs of liver damage, and even after nearly dying from pneumonia, he could not stay away from alcohol for long. In his final years, illness and drinking weakened his power in Hollywood. During Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, he no longer had the strength to fully defend his creative vision. W.C. Fields died on Christmas Day, 1946, at 66. His story is not loud like a bar fight. It is darker than that. Alcohol turned his pain into a punchline, then slowly took the man behind the joke. Buster Keaton was called the Great Stone Face for a reason. On screen, trains could crash, houses could fall, the whole world could explode around him, and he would barely blink. He turned disaster into comedy with a straight face and perfect timing. But off-screen, the disaster was not funny at all. Keaton's trouble deepened after he signed with MGM. Before that, he had been a silent film genius with control over his own work. At MGM, that freedom began to disappear. The studio system took over, his creative power faded, his marriage to Natalie Talmadge collapsed, and alcohol started pulling him down fast. After what? No beer? His drinking had reportedly become too much for the studio to handle. MGM fired him in 1933. Keaton's fall was not the loud kind with broken hotel furniture or cops dragging him out of a nightclub. His was sadder, quieter, and maybe even more painful. He became a heavy drinker, went bankrupt in 1934, and eventually had to enter a sanitarium. Even his marriage to May Scriven was later described as something that happened while he was in a drunken fog. That sounds less like romance and more like waking up inside your own bad decision. The irony is brutal. On screen, Keaton was the man who never lost control. Off-screen, alcohol took almost everything he had controlled: his studio power, his money, his marriages, and his place at the top of comedy, just as Hollywood was changing forever. Keaton later recovered, married Eleanor Norris, and was finally honored as a film legend. But his story still hits hard. Alcohol did not erase his genius, but it nearly buried it. The man who made the world laugh without changing his face almost lost himself completely behind the bottle. Gail Russell was only 18 when Paramount signed her, and on camera, she looked like the kind of innocent beauty Hollywood loved to protect. Off camera, she was terrified. Severe stage fright followed her onto the set, and alcohol became the thing she used to get through the job. Bad solution. Very bad sequel. By 1953, her drinking had reached the police. Russell was jailed overnight after a drunk driving arrest. In 1954, a Santa Monica court fined her for drunkenness, ordered her to avoid alcohol and night spots for 2 years, and told her to get medical treatment. That was the warning shot. She did not stop. In February 1955, she hit another car carrying a couple and their baby. Then came the worst crash. At 4 in the morning on July 4th, 1957, Russell drove her convertible straight into John's restaurant on Beverly Boulevard and injured a janitor inside. She failed a sobriety test, missed court, and was later found at home passed out from drinking. Gail Russell had beauty, fame, and a studio career most young actresses would dream of, but alcohol kept turning chances into wreckage. In 1961, she died at only 36 with an empty vodka bottle beside her. That is not Hollywood tragedy. That is alcohol collecting the final bill. Old Hollywood made drinking look like part of the legend, but the truth was much sadder. Behind the fame were broken bodies, broken families, and lives that ended too soon. So if alcohol is hurting you or someone you love, don't wait for a dramatic ending. Step back, get help, protect your health, and choose a better tomorrow. See you in the next story.